Hi, this is Shauna, the CEO and founder of Fuel Talent. One of the things I have loved most in my 25-year recruiting career has always been the stories that people tell. Stories of leadership, career choices, company ideas, and team building. My inspiration for starting the What Fuels You podcast came from being curious about people's lives and wanting to help share their stories. What path brought them to this place? What decisions did they make that led to failures and successes? Who influenced those decisions, and what lessons were learned along the way? I hope you enjoy the What Fuels You podcast. Today's guest on the What Fuels You podcast is Kirt Debique. Kirt is the CEO and CTO of SyncFloor, a B2B platform providing licensed access to high-quality commercial music for use by businesses and creators. Built around the concept of natural language music search, SyncFloor has created an intuitive and innovative engine for music discovery, and the patented SyncFloor platform connects customer websites, services, and applications to music from the world's best labels and publishers. The company is also the maker of Songs for Podcasters, a modern podcast-specific music licensing experience made for consumers, small businesses, and creative professionals. A 20-year Microsoft veteran with experience as an engineer, architect, technology strategist, and general manager, Kirt has worked on mobile productivity, real-time communications, multimedia systems, distributed security, and operating systems. He is an accomplished inventor with 38 technology patents, as well as the owner and founder of Brick Lane Records, a Seattle independent music label. Welcome, Kirt.
Thank you, Shauna. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for joining. Okay, we're going to start with some rapid fire. You ready?
Oh, boy. Okay.
Okay. All right. I was going to say, what's your favorite music? And then I realized if somebody asked me that, I would literally have to say, depends on my mood. Am I going out? Am I chilling? Am I driving? So I just said, what's your favorite type of music to chill out to?
Oh, to chill out to. Even that is actually kind of a hard one. But
well, you can just say your favorite overall.
I'll give you a couple of different dimensions on it. So I know if we're kind of chilling out, cooking in the kitchen and watching my now 16-month-old like spin around and dance to something, then it's music from my country, Trinidad. My favorite calypsonian is a guy named David Rudder. And so I love putting that on, and he enjoys it. And it's a nice kind of thing to, sort of cook and spend a nice weekend day family time with. If I'm in a different kind of chilly mood and I want something that's like got texture and interest but like sort of still allows other kinds of things to happen in my mind, I love listening to things like The National. Like National's a band I love to listen to a lot.
So tell me, what's your favorite place or what you would most recommend as a place to visit in the Caribbean?
Oh, well, Trinidad.
I know you're going to say Trinidad.
No, St. Lucia. St. Lucia is also really beautiful. St. Vincent, where my dad is from, is beautiful, although they had Soufriere erupt relatively recently. There's a volcano. But, Trinidad's an amazing place. The thing is, Trinidad has this incredible mix of people and cultures based on its history. So, of course it was, sort of rediscovered by the Spaniards, and had an indigenous people there. And then, sort of the Spaniards, based on the slave trade, sort of brought people of African descent there. At some point, it traded hands to the English, and with the sort of abolition of slavery, there was this sort of influx of indentured laborers from India and China as well. And so Trinidad kind of has this thing where it's got, sort of people of African descent, Indian descent, Chinese descent, Syrian, it's just a whole mix, right? And then it's 7 miles off the coast of Venezuela, and it has, of course, this sort of Creole influence as well. And so you find this, like, it's such a interesting place to be. Certainly an interesting place to grow up. But I think it's sort of for somebody who visits, like, they probably will go there and go, "Oh, this isn't even what I expected when I thought Caribbean island." And then you throw in carnival. So Trinidad's carnival is, the second largest one, right after Rio, essentially, right? And so you have this huge thing that happens there as well. And then of course Trinidad's the, land of the steel band, home of Calypso.
You're getting me excited to go. We have to help me plan a trip. This is like
it's a great place.
I know. It's always been on my list for sure. So is there a food that you can't live without? It doesn't have to be Trinidadian or Creole. It could any kind of food.
Any kind of food. Well, my dad calls me a meat mouth. So I definitely eat a lot of meat, but maybe much to the chagrin of my wife. She probably thinks I should eat less meat. But in terms of something that's like very, Trinidadian that I cook, and I when you say can't live without, it's one of those things where there are a lot of food. I love food. I love cooking food. I love, that kind of thing. My dad is somebody I learned to cook from, and he gave me a cookbook I still have where the inscription on it is for the continuation of the proud tradition of male cooks of the Debique clan. Oh. And so you can see that's a really important thing, sort of to us. And but one of the things, and actually the main thing I learned to cook out of that, well, really from my dad and but also out of that book, is this dish called pilau, which is a Trinidadian dish. And it's the thing that I'll, sort of always go back to. It's a very comfort food type thing. It's a one pot rice. It's almost like a meat
like a stew?
Kind of paella-ish kind of dish, but it's not, paella is very seafood based, but it's kind of meat based, and it's got coconut milk in it.
I would love that. It's got all sorts of,
it's the kind of thing that in Trinidad you take to the beach, or you take to the cricket match, or you take to, it's very easy to transport. It's easy to eat. You have it with coleslaw.
You're making me hungry. That sounds so good. So good.
Excellent.
So is there some sort of superpower that you wish you had?
If you were to talk to me in my younger years, I think flying is the thing that everybody's just like, oh man, I'd love to be able to fly. Isn't that really interesting? But, I think, like Magneto, I think that's an interesting one. Like, sort of power to control magnetism. I feel like that's like something that you could then translate into lots of different things.
Yeah, sounds exciting and scary.
Yeah. Magneto is also exciting and scary, yes. I suppose. But so maybe something like that.
Are you doing a lot of reading these days? And if so, what is a book that you would recommend?
So my niece, right, who reads a ton as well. I love to read. So I in some ways, I'm having that same kind of music problem where I'm like, I could talk about so many different things I want to read. But the book that I'm supposed to read, because my niece is waiting for me to read it so we can have a conversation about it, is Anne of Green Gables. Right? And I was supposed, so I have that on my list somewhere.
Do you read business books?
At times, although these days I feel like I get a lot of insight on like just reading sort of posts from and blogs and articles from people. I typically tend to get that first thing of it from Twitter. And then I go follow, I go, oh, okay, this person's saying some interesting stuff. And then you go, read their blog or or listen to their podcast or whatever it is. But I feel like, there's, an interesting thing that's happening out there is that, we're sitting on top, we're sitting on the shoulders of giants, right? So they're, in some ways, humanity, right, gets the benefit of all this stuff that's happened. But now, we get access to that, right? Like we get easy access to all of that knowledge, right? And so, sort of finding those places where you can kind of touch on the pulse of the knowledge that's being evolved and created and remixed and so on is actually really, really interesting. And so I find that works almost best for me for business. Of course, there are the things like, like reading some of the classics, whether it's like, Good to Great or things like that. That's interesting too, right? But like, it's just like, there's a way now to sort of stay really current with the state of the art of thinking of that type of thing. And so that's what, I particularly like to do.
So is there a person that you can think of that you would choose to grab lunch with, like anyone in the world? And if so, who would that be?
So do you remember, I think it was a Parts Unknown episode where Anthony Bourdain sat with Obama. It was in Vietnam, and so yeah, so Obama is the person. So there are two answers to this. The one that's sort of the expansive answer is Obama, and that's what made me think of this episode where they sat with Obama and had
Obama. That would be amazing.
Had a really fun conversation over sort of noodles or something like that.
I think I actually did see this episode.
Yeah, so that's one, and the other one actually, honestly, right now is my dad.
Oh,
because
is he in Trinidad?
He's in Trinidad. I haven't seen him for a while. With the pandemic and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
He hasn't gotten to meet his grandson as yet. And so maybe the three of us sitting and having some food. My son loves to eat. Loves to eat food.
Good. He's a Debique. He's the third generation.
Sorry, exactly.
That's great. So tell me, you talked about your dad a lot. So tell me about your childhood. Yeah. We talked about growing up in Trinidad. Like, what was your life like as a child?
Boy, it was really fun. It was fun, and it was also very my parents were both teachers. My dad ended up going into finance, but they were both teachers. And so, and there's a sort of cultural thing in Trinidad where, education and doing, sort of well education is really highly valued. And so, I think for me, there was an environment, and I think this worked well for my mind anyway, where you were encouraged to read and learn and explore in that sense. My parents split when I was 10. And I spent a lot in this, it's informed, I think, my relationship with my dad, especially. I lived with my dad because where he worked was close to the school that I was going to. So I developed a really close relationship with my dad. He would wake me up in the morning, put me in front of the table, make tea, put it in front of me, sort of try to get me to come out of the fog, right? Make sure that I got ready for school, and he'd take me to school, and just like and that, I think that there's a thing about even those rituals that are really grounding. Yeah. I still a very grounding, calming thing for me is to have a cup of tea, right? And that comes from just growing up in that kind of way, and having tea reminds me of that process of getting up and getting into it, and reminds me of family and my dad, and that kind of thing.
That's great.
And so so that's.
But he sounds like he was a real inspiration for you. Were there others like teachers or? Because obviously I know that you graduated and went to college at 16. So I'm just wondering how that happens, because I have a 16-year-old. I'm like, maybe he's ready for college. I don't really know. Maybe.
I will say to that, I don't know that I was necessarily emotionally ready for college. I was probably intellectually ready for it, but emotionally, I don't know. Part of that, it is that in Trinidad, the school systems are really good. And again, it's very, very optimized for this, help people achieve academically. And parents, and having two parents who were teachers, that helps too, right? They cared a lot about that. In fact, they cared so much about it that, ultimately later on, when I graduated undergrad, I was on my way to Stanford to do grad school in computer science. And I stopped off at Microsoft.
I saw this. That was for an internship though, right?
Right, for an internship, exactly. And I remember when I ended up deciding, after a month, they offered me a full-time job. I decided to take the full-time job instead of going to grad school.
Your parents are you crazy?
They were just
I have to say, when I read it, I was like, is he crazy? Crazy. Microsoft will be there.
Well, they understood. At the time, which was 92, right? For somebody maybe here, they might have kind of said, okay, yeah, Microsoft, and it's, interesting, but it certainly was not the scale of brand it is today yet. But for them there, especially, they were just like, micro what? Kind of,
right. And it's also, did they understand Stanford is not like.
Oh, they knew Stanford. They understood Stanford, right?
Okay, so they were just it's not like you're turning down some school. You're turning down
right? Yeah, exactly. So they were just like, "What are you doing?" Kind of thing.
So you were. I'm guessing you were a good student all through growing up.
Yeah, I was a pretty good. I think there was a I think there was a year where I was a little less than a student that
We all have those.
my dad was like really unhappy about, but for the most part, I
He's
was
like, no tea for you.
No tea for me.
No tea for you.
Exactly.
So what were you kind of dreaming about, or were you ambitious to succeed? And if so, in what area?
Yeah,
like academics or sports?
Yeah. I got bit by the bug, as you know, the sort of software bug, fairly early. My mom had done a systems analysis course at the University of the West Indies, which is, you know, sort of part of a system of universities in the Caribbean. And she used to bring the punch cards home, you know, and I would like mess them up, you know, kind of thing. But you know, really early on, I kind of thought, oh wow, this is really cool. And like it, you know, I love solving puzzles, and I love, like, you know, software and programming became something that was like really a very natural fit for the way I thought. And I realize now, as I'm older, I realize that, like, oh, I'm a maker at heart. I like making things, right? And software is this sort of really magical way of making things, because you get very immediate feedback on the thing that you're making, you know, kind of thing. And so, and there's almost infinite possibility in terms of the scope of the thing that you can make. And so I got bit by that bug fairly early. And so I definitely was really into wanting to do that thing. And so, you know, I was like, you know, beeline, you know, I wanted to do computer science, computer engineering. And so that's what I ended up doing for undergrad. It's what, you know, really attracted me actually about Microsoft when I, you know, came in. I was just like, wow, there's just this whole world of building and making stuff.
I wish that I had that skill. It's such a powerful, like, it's not something nobody can take from you. It's just, you know,
that's right.
You have it or you don't. And so how did you choose to go to school in Miami?
Actually, they came to Trinidad and recruited me. Like, so University of Miami was really interesting at the time, is that they were I think, you know, this would have been in like sort of mid to late 80s. You know, they kind of said, you know what, as a college that has some resources, University of Miami is fairly decently endowed, and you know, as you know, is sitting in a place that's kind of on the border, right? You know, if you think about, you know, what funnels through Miami, right? You know, the Caribbean, Latin America, you know, on, et cetera, right? Yeah. We're like, you know what, we have a unique opportunity to go find some of the best talent coming from these other countries and bring them here. And that, you know, sort of expands our remit as a university, right? And it's also, you know, Miami, if you're coming from, you know, South America, or you're coming from the Caribbean, it's not like a crazy place to land. You know what I mean? Like, you
you can
kind of get it. You can kind of get it in some sense. And so they actually were really aggressive about coming and trying to find great talent at schools and other places. And I remember the name of the guy, I think, is Mark Reed. I think was the name of the guy I spoke to. Ultimately, I ended up getting a scholarship to go there.
Yeah. And what did you end up studying?
Computer engineering.
And you just knew, you're like,
I just knew, yeah, that was, yeah, there's no question that that's the thing I was going to go do.
Yeah. So you're heading to Stanford potentially for your, you know, master's degree in I guess computer science.
Yeah.
And you have a little pit stop that lands you for 20 years at Microsoft.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I never told them.
What do you think of Seattle? Big adjustment from Miami and Trinidad.
It was, and it wasn't. Like, so this is 20 years ago, just keep in mind, you know, so there was a thing about Seattle that I kind of found comforting. I would told my dad once, and I don't know that this necessarily holds now, but I was like, it's kind of like a cold, wet Trinidad.
Oh, God. That doesn't sound good. but you know, but what I found was that I think this had a lot to do with where I landed and what I was doing. Is I was like, look, I found my people. Like, I found the stuff, you know, the thing I love doing, and a bunch of people that love doing the same thing. And I feel super, you know, pushed and you know, engaged in what I was up to. And so I felt like the environment around me was very comforting in that sense, right? Like, I didn't feel like I was in a strange place in that sense. And it felt like a place that I could sort of grow into myself, right? In that sense, right? So your overall experience with Microsoft obviously was a really sounds like a very positive one. Oh yeah, it was very positive. What would you say if you were talking to your niece or to my child, or somebody who's thinking about going to Microsoft, as far as like how to be successful there? Like, what are the attributes of like a successful Microsoft person? Because I know some people, it's not for everyone.
It's not for everyone, but you know, I don't even know that this is necessarily specifically a Microsoft thing. I think, you know, let's take, sort of the software industry anyway. I think as somebody who's doing product work or engineering work, etc., I think there's a basic love for solving problems in that sphere that you should go in with. Like it's one of those things where I think it's easy. I shouldn't say easy. That's not the right word. There are times when you have to do a job because you got to do a job, right? That's a part of life and figuring out life too. But I think especially so in software, but probably true in many other spheres, being successful at it starts with wanting to do it almost for its own sake.
Right, for free. Like, what would you do if you didn't
exactly.
get paid?
Exactly. You just want to do this thing. You want to solve these problems, right? It's just it's something that gives you joy in some sense, for its own sake. I think almost anything when that's the starting point motivation, it doesn't mean it's the ending point motivation. Everybody's got to eat and they got to, feed their family and all those things. All those things are incredibly important too. But if your starting point motivation comes from this place of like, I just really love doing this thing, then I think it really sets you up really well for success. So, winding that back to kids, and it's something that I think more and more now, having a young child, it's really helping them find the things that touch them that way, right? And saying that, whatever it is, it's okay, because when you find it, right, you're going to find a way to be successful with it, right? Mm-hmm. And we're going to be here to support you finding a way to be successful with it.
Yes.
When you find that.
I have to say, one of the best things about doing this podcast, it's been like 2.5 years. I feel like I'm becoming, and it doesn't necessarily translate to action, but I feel inspired as a mom. Almost every conversation, I'm like, I need to be doing that. Because it's true, like the kids, and then figuring out your philosophy around pushing them to complete something and finish something if they don't like it.
Yes.
Because you'll see when you have a son, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Third generation, the third Debique eater. Eater boy. If he goes out and you're like, I want you to play soccer, or I want you to play piano, or I want you to start coding, and he's like, ugh, I'm not into it. It's like, then what? Do you just
then what?
quit? That's been the toughest part for me.
And it's that's a fine balance. And I think, for me, that type of thing, sort of wraps back around to, your word about something means something, right? Mm-hmm. So if you say, yeah, I'm going to do X, I'm going to finish, X or whatever, that ultimately means something. And I think in their lives, they, you want to sort of imbue this idea that over time, the more that you can mean what you say and do what you said based on what you meant, right? Like that's important too. So find who you are, find the thing you love, and really lean into that.
Yeah.
But independent of that thing, when you say to somebody, yeah, I'll get X done, get it done.
Yeah.
Right. And none of us are perfect in that, right?
Yeah.
But I think, the other thing is that striving, right? Like the effort to become a more perfect being, if you want to call it that, right? That's worth it in and of itself too.
Oh, totally. Just having that type of mindset of like improvement and growth.
Yeah, and I'll I didn't do it well this time. I can acknowledge that, and I'm going to try to do it better next time.
Yeah,
whatever it is.
Yeah. And so, how has the culture of Microsoft informed kind of the way you want to lead and create a culture at SyncFloor? And I want to get into like even that process of leading and making that decision.
Yeah. Well, certainly my experience at Microsoft helped give me a broad base for understanding what it means to build teams and lead teams. It also gave me a great foundation of, I'll call it lack of fear of the unknown, right? In some sense, I said this once in an interview that my mom, I thank my mom a lot for, she I think gave me a very natural, she's not afraid of anything. She'll jump into all sorts of stuff. And she gave me a natural sense of like, it's okay, just try something, like go for it kind of thing. But I think that was really reinforced at Microsoft, where I got to try and learn and do and fail and succeed and, and lots of different kinds of stuff. So coming out and doing a startup and going on that journey, right, is something that I felt really, I hadn't done it before, but I felt prepared for, in the sense that I was not, I wasn't shy about trying something out, right? And knowing that I'm going to have to learn as I go, kind of thing. And I think that was a really important part of my experience there that helped.
Yeah. And other cultural attributes from Microsoft that are like, or even systems or policies or just ways of thinking that you think will be like, oh, kind of, this is definitely an ex-Microsoft person. Like, you work,
right,
I work with companies where this is an ex-Amazonian and they carry that stuff over to the culture. Or are you trying to kind of build something different?
I'd say from a technical perspective, this came up recently, actually. I was having a conversation with one of our investors, and who's also a Microsoft, high-level former Microsoft engineer. There's sort of a platform thinking that's a very Microsoft thing, right? It's sort of like, oh, I'm gonna build something large and complicated, but the way I'm gonna think about building it is as something that others can build on. And even if the other that's going to build on it is me, right, initially, like I'm going to just think that it's really hard, I think, as a senior engineer at Microsoft, not to come out of that experience, thinking that even if I'm going to build, let's say, an app, right, not thinking, well, first I'm going to build the thing I'm going to build the app with, right? And then it turns out that gives you a ton of option value. Right. So even, we found ourselves at Syncflor, for instance, we sort of built this underlying platform for building sort of access to licensed access to commercial music in the independent sector. And the first thing we built was actually this marketplace that was targeted at traditional media, film, TV, advertising, et cetera. And it turned out that we would then at some point wanted to think about, an experiment in podcasting, and we built another app on the same thing that was for podcasters. And then ultimately where we are now is that we actually think the big idea is the platform thing itself and our ability to leverage that into lots of different verticals. One of the first of which right now is actually fitness and wellness. And so we built some stuff related to that, right? And what we found is that having built it the way we built it is that we have all this option value.
Yeah, you can be nimble and
that kind of thing. And that I feel like that platform thinking is a very Microsoft thing.
Yeah. And so you're working at Microsoft and you're thinking like, I want to be an entrepreneur. I better come up with an idea, or you have an idea and then you're like, I better now go build that idea. Which came first?
The giraffe. Not the chicken or the egg. You're like, what are you talking about? As it turned out, what happened for me was that in my sort of latter years at Microsoft, I had also been getting really connected into this artistic community in Seattle. Seattle's a wonderful community.
The record label, the whole deal.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, I
listened to some of the music, by the way.
Oh boy. Yeah. We'll talk. That'll be a whole other conversation.
Yeah, it matches your background. It's like
exactly. Definitely very spacey music, spacey synthy kind of stuff. Not my music anyway. It's not me. So I'd been connected into this artistic community. I was making music myself and meeting people that I cared about a ton, and seeing a lot of disruptive things happening in the music industry, and particularly disruptive for the independent sector in the music industry, and wanted to figure out like how can I kind of help this, and part of my journey as I started to think about what I wanted to do next ultimately led me to leaving Microsoft to start a music label. Called Brick Lane Records. And so starting this independent label gave me a chance to try to do something differently in the context of the way music labels and the relationship between labels and artists were structured than had been typical at that time. And I could get into sort of what those things were about as well. But having done that, and having gone through that experience, that's what ultimately led to this idea that we could take that mission and that vision for trying to create more opportunity for independence to another level by doing what we did with Syncflor, by what we're doing with Syncflor.
Yeah.
And so really it's sort of this kind of winding journey, but I would say the red thread in that is following the things that you love and you care about, and the good that you want to do or see in the world, in a sense.
And right? Seeing that you're like also figuring out that if you're trying to solve a problem and maybe it's like, oh, there's this other problem also, that you can be nimble and And interesting. So I also know that you have a co-founder, right?
Yes.
And
yes.
so was that like a, hey, bud, I have this idea, or you came up with this together? How did you kind of also make sure, I know that there's a lot of co-founders who end up not being great co-founders together. What was your vetting process for that?
So we were, I think incredibly lucky in that, so Sejan and I met while I was at Microsoft. We were, working on really complex, large transactions together. I was sort of leading the sort of technical side of that, and she was lead outside counsel for Microsoft on building out the contractual stuff. And in fact, we met while working on a transaction that the contract was like 120 pages or something. So it's very, very complex transaction. So we worked together a ton, trying to make sure that the vision that we had technically was well encoded in the legal language. And we found we worked really well together and became friends. And as I was leaving to do the label, I said, hey, I'm going to go do this label. I'm going to need great counsel. You want to come learn this thing with me? Because I'm going to go learn an industry, essentially, that I know nothing about. And she was like, sure, why not? How hard could it be? Which, of course, is always famous last words, right? And so we're like, great. We learned a lot about the industry together, especially trying to do something different in terms of how we were structuring the label. And then so ultimately, when I started talking about this idea about like, well, what if we could do this, sort of marry an understanding of technology and understanding of the music business and try to solve for this, sort of access to opportunity issue that we were seeing in a particular sphere in terms of licensing music for these types of commercial uses. She was like, let's go after that too. Right?
How hard could it be?
How hard could it be? And then, it's like, 4 years later, and she's like, we're still doing this, Kirt. I'm like, yeah, it's maybe taking a little longer than I said it would, but it's all right.
Yeah, that's funny. So you know her from that. And so how did you guys go about funding the business? I know you mentioned investors.
Yeah. So initially, our first we, just kind of worked on some of the deep technologies that's required for what we were building. We created a new discovery system, which was actually patented. We received the patent late November last year, I think. And so, we worked on that actually for the first, couple of years, but about a year into it, we were starting to kind of go, yeah, I think this is going to work. And so at that point, we raised sort of friends and family round, and as sort of the first pre-seed round that we did. Once we kind of got to the point where we felt that was sort of on its way towards being truly productized, we realized the next big thing that we had to do was to create a content ecosystem around what we're doing, which today, we have something like 80 plus partners and 18,000 plus tracks and that kind of thing, but we had to start from scratch building this content ecosystem. And so at that point, we then raised sort of our first institutional funding from 3 Northwest VCs, led by Ascend, by Kirby. Winfield. And so
I love Kirby.
Yeah, he's awesome. He's the on our board, and he's an amazing person to have in your corner. Yeah. And so that's sort of part. And then we've since done some more raises and so on, and we're actually just going into our seed raise right now.
Exciting. So that's awesome. And how was this past? I guess I don't even know where we are in this whole pandemic ridiculousness.
Yeah.
The net is it's been a shit show of last couple of years. And so
it's a good net.
How does this type of pandemic, some people are just like, ugh, and other people are like, no, it actually was great for our business. Like, how was it for your business and how did you change things?
Yeah, it was really interesting for us in that, we essentially launched right in the middle of all of that stuff. And so we had to really take a step back and think about, so when the first thing we launched was this, marketplace targeted at production professionals, producers, editors, music supervisors in media, in traditional media, film, TV advertising. And that, if you look at what happened with production pipelines when the pandemic sort of really struck and evolved, is that they softened, right? So people had to kind of step back and say, well, we don't even know how to get people together safely, right? So that's one thing. The people who are doing advertising, we don't even know what the right messages are to then, so you have this kind of softening of production pipelines, which softens post-production pipelines, which means that music licensing is something that takes a hit there. So we're kind of stepping back and trying to understand how to, deal with that. At the same time, as you kind of spin out that story, one of the things that happened for us is that, I said, I think a little earlier that we kind of figured out that the big idea was the platform and that we could leverage that platform into lots of different verticals. As we were thinking about that whole thing, right, what we were seeing out there is that the verticals that we were looking at being potential targets some of them were ones that the pandemic had actually accelerated growth in. Right. So wellness and fitness, like the whole idea of digital fitness, whether that's, subscribe to some, live and on-demand boutique fitness site or getting a device delivered to your home. And that's the connected way that you get access to, again, live and on-demand fitness and wellness, that just exploded. Right. The Peloton phenomenon, right. That just exploded. And when you think about that, at the core of any of these things, whether you're using a device or you're using your laptop or you're using your whatever it is, right? Music is sort of at the core of emotional engagement in those activities, right? And, we found that, finding ways to license great commercial music, particularly for on-demand, like, sort of recording on-demand stuff and also for live, is a fairly complex thing that's really, difficult for many of these entities in that vertical. And so that opened up this like, oh, here's something really interesting we can do. We have like the perfect platform to go solve this problem. You take that same thing and then you look at gaming, right? All of a sudden you get, explosion in gaming minutes because they're sitting at home, right? Like going, okay, you're like, what do I do? You'd get, a similar thing happen with the social audio phenomenon, right? You get an explosion that had already been happening, but continued to happen with people consuming podcasts and therefore needing to create podcasts. And you start to say, oh, we could take this platform and really figure out how to take that and serve these verticals. And these verticals are actually doing really well in the context of the pandemic. Yeah. And so now is a great time to kind of lean in to that. And so the one we're leaning into first, because as a startup, you can have a grand vision, which we do, and you have a total addressable market that's now larger because we're looking across multiple verticals. But, you need to also focus on something that you're going to execute
and make sure that you can get good at it, because then
that's right, exactly.
And then it's repeatable, because you're like, okay, we already did this, and now we just have to same thing, but just rinse, repeat.
But yeah,
different
exactly.
industry.
And so we decided that fitness and wellness is the one that we're really leaning into, and so that's been a really interesting journey.
That's great. And so, what is the exact business model?
Yeah, so essentially what happens is that if let's take the fitness case, since that's the one we're leaning into. Yeah. What we do is we provide sort of a dedicated library that gives a fitness business access to our corpus of great commercial independent music. They actually get to have their instructors build playlists and curate almost like a DJ'd experience where they can pick a song or a set of songs and pick where to start and end the songs and speed them up and slow them down and do all sorts of stuff, and then deliver that experience into their recording. And so all that's sort of part of the platform. When they purchase the licenses for those songs for recording, we just record that licensed activity, and at the end of the month we bill the business for the licensed activity. And what we bill them is the license fee plus a service charge for using the platform, right? And so that's what they pay us. And so you can imagine that the first thing we get, of course, is that service charge that comes directly to us for providing the platform. The license fee, we pay out our underlying license, rights holders, and we pay them 90% of the license fee. So we take a commission on that as well. So we actually kind of get to sort of eat on both sides, right? But the way we look at it is that we're able to have a reasonable charge for both the licensee and the licensor, right? Because we're sort of split fee. It's a split fee structure. Yeah. So we still get a great sort of take rate, but nobody feels overburdened.
Right. And you're not putting yourself in a position to be like the man taking from the artist or taking from.
Yeah. And so these rights holders, the deal we give them, so that 10% that we take is the lowest. Like they're always like, oh wow, that's a great deal. Yes. We've never seen anything
in the industry.
In the industry, right? And so that's great that we can do that, and they're super happy. And then when we go to a licensee and we say, okay, well here's the cost of the licenses, and we charge you, this 10% service charge for using the platform. When they look at the value we provide them in the platform, from discovery to curation to delivery of the music into their experience, etc., they're like, wow, that's a great deal.
Yeah, right? That's great.
And so you make everybody happy that way.
And so you're raising the seed round. How much, do you mind saying how much you're raising and what you're planning on?
We're looking to raise $3 million.
$3 million. And what are you planning to do? Is that to build out more product?
More products. Yep. So on the product side, we're, engineering hires, product management hires, that type of thing, to continue to build out this platform, and in particular take, do the additional features we think are relevant to fitness, but importantly, keep building the platform. So as we get ready to do exactly what you say is that, great, we got fitness locked up. Now we're going to go to gaming.
Yeah.
Now we're going to go to sort of be able to have a platform that's continues to be nimble for that. So that's sort of on the engineering side. On the music intake side, we want to continue to develop our content and partner ecosystem. We have something like 84 partners now, and we're continuing to grow that, which means managing a large partner base and also bringing in lots of music, which includes, a music analyst team that we have, because we have sort of algorithmic analysis and human analysis coming together to give us the richest possible information about music. And so sort of continue to build that out. And then, of course, building out our GTM process. So business and partner and sales development. And there, the big thing is to find, and build a team that can, sort of take a platform, think about distribution and go to market in a particular vertical, and figure out how to then, take the best learnings from that and apply it to a new vertical and apply it to a new vertical. And so those are the things.
Scale it. Wow. What do you hope the takeaway will be for anybody that's listening about SyncFloor, and how can they be helpful to helping you reach your goals? If somebody's like, oh my gosh, I need to know about this company and this is how I can help. Like, what are your needs right now?
So as a young company, we're still kind of getting the word out about our brand and who we are, so that we get that, in some sense, serendipity, right? Of people kind of going, oh wow, I've got the connection for you. So telling people about us is great. Coming and talking to us is great, because one of the things that I found on this journey is that we've benefited so much from perspective from people, right, in the industry, and that's only broadening, because as we take a platform that's going to go address a number of different fairly disparate verticals, right, we almost have a need now to talk to more people and get a better understanding of how to best package and distribute within any particular vertical. And so perspective is something that we crave. And so I'm here. I'm an open door. Please come talk to me. I'd love to hear from you.
I already gave Kirby a couple of people I thought you should talk to before awesome. I met you. Okay, so you're clearly busy. You're working your tail off, and you've got a young boy at home, and you've got the energy for it. So you're good.
He challenges even that, but that's definitely a part of it that I learned, as a first-time parent, that there's a whole other scale of energy that you need.
How did you meet your wife?
Oh, so Anna and I, do you know a place called Revolver in Seattle? Their big thing is that they, the bartenders would play vinyl records, sort of like, so they'd be sort of partly DJing sort of while they're kind of doing stuff, right? I had been in the practice of taking records from artists on the label to Revolver to just kind of like, oh hey, we put a new record out, if you want to put it in
exposure.
And I'm just more just say, hey, there's a cool place, you can put this in your library of stuff, play it, that kind of thing. So when my record came out, my first solo record came out, I took my record down there, and I didn't even tell them. I was just like, oh, we got another new record, blah blah blah. It happened to be my record, and they're like, oh, this is you, kind of thing. So they put that record on. Anna was there at the thing, trying hard not to be bothered by sort of random people like me, but we ended up striking up a conversation there. And I remember she thought at first, because she was like, oh, okay, you're from the Caribbean, blah blah. And I was like, yeah, and they're putting on a record. And so she was like expecting calypso or and the music I do is like this like super like gothy synthy,
it does not
9 Inch Nails, Depeche Mode.
It does not match you.
So she was just like, what is this stuff? Kind of thing. And so that's kind of how we met.
Oh, that's great. So what are you doing these days to kind of unwind and chill out?
It's a lot of family stuff, like so part of talking about energy, when Athanasius was born, he had 2 holes and 1 valve, 2 holes in his heart and 1 valve instead of 2. And so which is a difficult time, but at 4 months he had open heart surgery.
Oh my gosh.
And so now he has no holes and 2 valves. So that's great. They didn't have enough tissue to completely close one of the valves. So there's like an issue there. We continue to give him meds and that kind of thing. But he's doing super well. So let me, say that, or out front, he's 90th plus percentile weight and height. He's a terror in all the best ways. Right. And so, this summer, we sort of declared the summer of Thanos, because we Athanasius, we call him Thanos for short. And so we've been doing all these like kind of staycation, like rent things on lakes, and just let him have like the most amazing, who knows if you'll remember, 16 months. But we're like, you had such a hard summer last summer. We're going to give you the best summer ever.
I'm so glad he's doing well. And so given how busy you are, like, what are you trying to do to, on like that Sunday night anxiety night of like, I got a big week ahead of me. How do you set yourself up for a really good week? And,
honestly, like as you probably remember, with a baby at that age, like it doesn't really even feel like there's a
Sunday to Monday
versus Monday, because you're in such a routine, right? Like, especially as it relates to kind of, heading towards bedtime kind of thing, and bath and blah blah, and getting him down, and I'll often be put him down and that kind of thing too. And so it's sort of like you go, and then he's asleep, and then you're like, okay, all right, let me take a breath, and figure out like, okay, how do we even talk together? And then, okay, what do I got to do next? And so it feels like that's just a continuous thing, which is probably not good. Like ultimately you got to find ways to like sort of step back. But right now I feel like it's just like you go, like, he wakes us up, like, kids at that age, they don't care what happened the night before. Like if you slept 1 hour or you slept 5 hours, doesn't matter.
He's still up at 5:30.
He's like, here I am, read this to me please, or here's my truck, or I want to jump on the bed, or
that's so cute.
Well, certainly at least the part of like, I'm up, come change me.
Yeah. So that would be the ultimate invention, just like a baby changer that's just like automatic. Just like, let me sleep while the diaper gets changed. My final question for you is, what fuels you? What's your ultimate fuel?
I'd put it in two parts. I still love this thing. I still love, building things and making things and solving problems in that sense. I think one of the nice things about being in a startup is that, certainly at the stage that we're at, you get this super direct, time spent with customers. And like in our case, the customers are now like, I would never have thought that I'd be spending a bunch of time with, trainers and, trying to make sure that we build the thing that they love. But that's such a great joy, making something and people using it, and I'm going, wow, this is transformative, and continue to refine that. So that's a big part of it. And then the other part is really about people. I'm from Trinidad. You probably can tell that I love people, and I love working in teams to make things, because you get to interact with people a lot. And I've had the good fortune to have that happen in the context of both technology and music, which are two things that I'm super passionate about. And I've gotten to put those things together in the thing that I'm doing now. And so I get, to interact with lots of great, smart, emotionally wonderful, creative people in all sorts of spheres, and figure out how to transform, day-to-day existence.
Thank you for listening to the What Fuels You podcast. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes, Google Podcasts, or Spotify, and follow us on social media to keep up with the latest news and episodes. You can also contact us at podcast@fueltalent.com to provide feedback, ask questions, and share topics or guests you would like us to cover in the future. We hope you feel inspired by our guests and that we have helped fuel your day. Join us next time for another episode of What Fuels You.